Jason McElberry, and with 3 first names. I also host the podcast at WYPR, Thoughts on Tech and Things, and I am the founder and CEO of a consulting company called Perry Labs. I'm happy to have all of you all here today to talk about Maryland and its energy mix. But before we get started, just curious, any of you know how much energy, or what percentage of the energy that's consumed here in Maryland that Maryland produces? Guesses?
40%.
40%?
It really varies day by day. So some days Maryland can actually produce more than enough electricity. Other days it may only be like 30 or 40%.
All right, so the answer I was going for at least, because those are all good answers, is 60%. About 40% of the remainder, 40% of the remainder of electricity, Maryland purchases from its partners.
One of those partners we're going to get to hear a lot about, PJM. And this is an important way to frame things, because when we talk about things here at the World Trade Center Institute, we tend to talk about trade deficiencies and dependencies and supply chains. And that's the exact same way that the energy system in Maryland works. It means that we rely on our partners, and it just so happens that, as you're going to hear in this conversation, those partners happen to be 13 states and the District of Columbia that all come together in order to figure out how this whole regional grid works. And so some of this conversation is about the trade relationship and how this trade relationship works when the terms of the relationship changes. And if you, like me, like all of us, spent time through COVID, then you got a chance to learn a lot about supply chains. And you also learned that when demand goes up, say demand like data centers, well, that changes the situation. It changes the way that your suppliers start to view things. And if you're a customer that's dependent on that, well, that starts to land on you, or maybe the distributor like BGE. So today we're going to get a lesson on how the grid works to make sure we understand. This is something that Jason Stanek, who I'll introduce in a bit, had a chance to talk about on my podcast about why Maryland's energy is so expensive. And we're also going to talk about the legislation impacting it, how we can fix it, and ultimately what this means for the future mix of energy to solve these problems, if that's possible. So I am joined today by an amazing group of individuals. What I love is when I put the names in order on my panelist list and they sit in the order, like they know exactly where they're supposed to be. So good job. So we have Jason Stanek. He's the Executive Director of Governmental Services at PJM Interconnection, the organization that coordinates the wholesale flow of electricity across 13 states and Washington, D.C. We have Adam Ortiz, the Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment, where he helps shape the state's environment and clean energy posture. He's also been one of the most direct public voices in Maryland on what's working, what's not, and how federal policy shifts are reshaping what the state can realistically accomplish, especially when it comes to energy. And we have Lindsey North. She's the Director of Clean Energy Strategy at Exelon, one of the nation's largest utility companies and the parent of BGE and Pepco. She leads the strategy work on how the utility navigates decarbonization, demand growth, affordability, and grid modernization in the markets it serves. So, welcome. So I'm going to go back to that opening statement. Most people in this room at least understand business supply chains. You have vendors, you have distributors, you have retailers. The grid works almost exactly like that, except it's all about keeping the lights and electricity on. Jason, we talked a little bit about this, and I was wondering if maybe we could start, and I'm targeting you, Jason and Lindsey, about what the grid is and how should we think about the way that the system works.
Great, thank you, Jason, and good morning, everybody. I'm the other Jason. So the grid is a large machine, right? We have 2 of them in the United States, separated by the Rocky Mountains. On the Eastern Interconnection, we have a number of smaller grids, including PJM. We are the largest power grid operator in the United States, as Jason said, serving 67 million customers, 13 states, including Maryland. Our job, effectively, if you can envision, is air traffic control. We operate from an air traffic control room, subterranean, in a nondescript office park outside of Philadelphia, guarded by men and women with guns and dogs and high fences. What we do is we operate the actual transmission lines 88,000 miles of transmission lines, all high voltage, but we don't own them. Entities like Exelon, who are the transmission owner, turn over operational control to us. We also work with generators. We have access to 1,400 generators, including natural gas plants, coal plants, wind, solar, oil, diesel, hydroelectric, such as Conowingo up the Susquehanna. So we work to balance the grid in real time, 24/7, making sure that electricity demand at 3 a.m. is balanced similar to electricity demand at 3 p.m. But the state of the grid is becoming much more fragile now. We had a service interruption in Baltimore, a blackout, on August 11th of last year, right here in Baltimore. Quite ironically, across the street, we're having our PJM annual meeting, where Governor Moore spoke at yesterday. Up until recently, nobody heard of PJM, but now we're breaking headlines almost every day, definitely today. And it's because the situation is getting more critical in states like Maryland, which, as we noted those statistics at the beginning, we don't have our own generation in state to satisfy our demand. And last year, I looked at every one of the 365 days. Maryland got close to not being reliant on others on one day. Close, but no cigar. So it imported 365 days. And not having transmission lines in sufficient quantity and not having enough generation puts the state in a really challenged position when I look at the other states that we're responsible for. So trying to figure out how to meet supply and demand will be the challenge of this conversation.
So Jason, I've tried to break this down in the simplest way I can think of. So supply chains, just think of a grocery store. Grocery store is the place that you go to buy at the retailer. That's the distributor. That's BGAE in my example here, a Pepco. That's where you go to buy your things. PJM, it's like the warehouse as well as the trucks that deliver to the distributor. And then a step behind that are the farmers. Those are suppliers. Those are coal power plants that are potentially owned privately, publicly, that are then powering the systems to the warehouse to do delivery. Does that seem like a fair?
That's a good analogy. We're the Costco, right? We're the wholesaler. We don't generate any power. We call up the farmer to produce that onion or squash. That's the electron. And we are fuel neutral, so we don't care where the electron is generated. We don't care if it's clean. We don't care if it's dirty. We are at such a challenged position now that we take the electron from wherever it's generated, and then we ship it. Our job is to make sure electricity is delivered safely from point of creation to point of consumption.
So, Lindsey, you wear a few different hats in this, as both BGE, Pepco, and then Exelon, which is a much bigger entity in this play. I think it's a common misconception for everyone who gets their BGE bill that BGE is the person generating the power. And now that we've just talked a little bit about this, I don't know if you can maybe touch on how the BGE bill works. What are we paying BGE for?
Sure. So while I do work for Exelon, technically I work for Pepco. So just to level set, most of my kind of framing is going to be around the Maryland and DC structure, but certainly can talk about that more broadly. So just to kind of level set, Exelon is comprised of 6 transmission and distribution utilities, as you kind of remarked, over 10 million customers, so electricity and gas. And we serve some of the largest cities around the country, so DC, Philly, Baltimore, Chicago. And so our lines cross that structure, and we coordinate closely with, obviously, PJM to make sure that the power, as it's coming from the sources from the generators to our customers. So when you think about your bill, which is, I think, the thing that has a lot of attention right now, and we were joking before this about who's more unpopular today, is it me or Jason? So to be determined at the end of this, but I think that there's really 3 parts to your bill. So there's transmission, distribution, and then there's supply charges. The transmission is largely pass-through charges. So these are charges that we are taking to provide that transmission service. The distribution side is the side to cover the cost to run the distribution system, and then supply. That's where all that generation comes from. So I think the one piece that I would add to here that is an interesting element is, so, folks in Maryland can buy their supply. You have an opportunity to buy third-party supply. You can also take standard offer servers from us. And so that's where we go out and contract with generators in the market, and we try to leverage, practices to keep those prices low, by, a mix of buying at different times of the year, having multi-year contracts. So there's ways that we can help kind of operate in that market. But those are the three basic pieces. And I think for us, just to kind of level set, I think we are really challenged in this situation that we're all in together. We all have a role to play, whether it's PJM, whether it's the state, whether it's utilities, because we need to solve the problem that we have, which is our customer bills have gone up in a way that is untenable. In parts of our service territory, it's gone up by 60%. So that's not across, but that's pretty significant. If you're a customer and your bill has gone up 60% because of supply changes, that is, not all supply changes, but largely, that's an issue. And so hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about what are we doing about it, because I think that's the part that's going to be most important for all of us.
So I want to take another stab at the analogy again. So both PJM and Pepco BG have transmission responsibilities. So I'm going to say, like, you're like the big warehouse, and then you have mini warehouses within the region that kind of circulates the energy. And then distribution, meaning you're responsible for essentially the lines through the city, whereas PJM is the big transmission to get it to the line. Does that seem like a fair way to think of it?
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. They're the last mile, right? They do the handoff. They deliver the package to your door. They'll pick it up from a larger warehouse where we'll deliver it to. But just to be clear, so Exelon has turned over operational control of all of its assets to PJM to manage.
Got it. Well, that's good to interesting to hear as well. So, Adam, the state also plays a role here. In the case of the state, and you're lucky that you get to talk for the entire state. I'm sure that you're excited about that. But the policies around generation, and that's something that we're going to talk a little bit more about as we go on, it really come down to the state's decisions on what's possible. And I know that the state has made a lot of bets around renewable energy sources that, because of changes within this current administration, haven't quite paid off like we're expected. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the state's role in this whole process.
Well, this is obviously a huge challenge, and the state is the representative of the people, and our job is to do the best that we can for the public good. So it's clear that the state has to provide more of a role in our part. So the utilities sort of are a world unto themselves, but the state certainly has a role as well. So a few things. So we all know in our personal lives and even in our jobs, you can work hard, but you can also work smart. And working harder doesn't always equal commensurate progress, but working smarter certainly can as well. And that's sort of what we've been grappling. This recent legislative session was pretty consequential. I think that we are taking steps in the right direction. We haven't we don't have all the solutions yet, but I think we have certain promising paths that can provide relief and meet three critical goals. One is reliability, of course. The lights have to come on. Secondly is affordability, of course. And the third is we have to be responsible. We can't externalize the cost of pollution onto future generations or on overburdened communities. So some of the things that the state is focused on in the recent legislative session, but has built over several administrations, both Republican and Democrat, are a few things. Now, on the smarter side, so the most efficient and the most environmentally energy policy is not to use energy, is to be more efficient. And even though our population has grown and our demands have grown over the last 40 years, until very recently, our electricity usage has remained relatively flat. And that's because that we have been more efficient, in the lights over our head, in our appliances, in generation, and weatherization of buildings. A lot of innovation there. So we continue to do that. Last year, the state instituted building energy performance standards. It was built off of examples around the country, including Montgomery County. And what we found was that sectors, especially large buildings, 300 square feet and larger, could do better. Not all of them. Some of them are very efficient, but we found was that there are hogs in every industry that use an overwhelming amount of energy. That's a burden on everybody. So having requirements for efficiency helps bring energy usage down, costs down, and improves reliability. In the Relief Act, which is a bill that was passed recently, and it's a huge bill with a lot of stuff, so I won't pretend to have my head around all of it, but some things that I want to highlight is an annual $100 million fund for local clean energy generation. So we are a net importer, but we can't understate the growth in local and clean energy generation. Solar has become more and more ubiquitous, small scale rooftop, but also large scale utility, and it's cheap, it's reliable, and it continues to grow, continues to pencil out. So looking at those projects for local generation with local reliability and community accessibility are part of the solution. Storage. Battery storage is a huge deal. One of the reasons, and I'm far from an expert, there are other people in the room here, but it's really peak demand times that drive the environmental burden, that increase cost. But if we're able to store energy and deploy it when we need to, and use smart systems, smart technology, smart deployment, we can be far more efficient with what we have. It is, in some ways, lamentable, of course, that we're a net importer, but that's because it's cheaper to do to have energy generation in other places and bring it here. But there's more that we can do in local generation, and that's very promising as well. And I will speak, you mentioned, Jason, a lamentable outcome in on the federal front. It's a tremendous disappointment and just completely counterintuitive that the presidential administration canceled and has been undermining. We're in court, but has been undermining the offshore wind project off of Ocean City. It's a big deal. It addresses all of our concerns. It's a source of energy. It's clean. There's some opposition, of course, in Ocean City, but all parts of the state are generating more. In Western Maryland, there are windmills all over the place. In Allegheny County, Washington County, and Garrett County, there's solar in all sorts of counties, urban as well as rural, and that's part of the solution as well. So that is a setback for sure, but I think we can work smarter as well as harder, and working smarter is really the way we're going to get out of this.
So now everyone understands the power grid, right? Right. So Adam, I want to follow up on that because I think it's a big part of this conversation. Is that Maryland had a plan until the plan was essentially derailed, and that plan was backed by a lot of renewable energy plans, such as the offshore project in Ocean City. There was also series of solar programs that were going in. I think at least 10,000 homes with solar power. So a lot of this was stopped, or I would say the funding for it was stopped by the new administration in 2025. When that funding was pulled, which is the U.S. The litigation that's in place around wind energy right now, well, that meant that some decisions had to be made, including not retiring certain coal power plants and other things to at least maintain the grid power at where it is now. But, because there is a question coming, but the other side of that is no one predicted that we would have the demand of data centers, that the demand was flat, it was fine to be a net importer, and suddenly this is an unexpected amount of demand that we're being hit. And I'm sure that all of you are going to have some thoughts on this, but what that means, going back to COVID, is that demand is peaked, and the places that we would typically rely on supply have a better deal. And that puts us in a position that we need to figure this out faster than we've had before. So is that first a fair summary of the situation?
Yeah, I think that's legit, and I know my colleagues up here also have some thoughts. So, so those are two pretty significant headwinds, but I do think that we're smart. Humanity is coming up with solutions, and we tend to meet most challenges that we meet, and those two are tough ones, no question about it. So data centers, what states are looking to do, and what Maryland is taking steps to, is to require data centers to provide their own energy, to have a certain standard for which they're drawing, both in their ability to generate, as also pay for any transmission upgrades as well. It's a huge industry, as we know, a lot of capital in it, and there's good actors and there's less good actors. We want to attract the good actors and the most responsible companies here in Maryland, and that we can do that through policy. With the federal headwinds, yeah, there's no question they've defunded and revoked permits, but people are still buying electric vehicles. People are still putting solar panels on their homes. And the renewable energy industry has an incredible amount of intellectual resources, an incredible amount of capital. So, it's a little bit of a punch in the face, but if you've ever seen MMA or boxing, people take punches and also keep standing and can still win. So that's where we are. There's no question there's challenges and there's headwinds. But I think the constituency around the renewable energy is quite strong.
I can see Jason's already ready to tap in. Keeping with M&A, well, you know what I meant. So I think PJM, I've heard, has talked about this in a bit of stark terms in terms of the need to act fast. And I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, we heard Adam a moment ago say we need it fast, which we do. We need it reliable, right? We need so quality needs to be good, and it needs to be affordable. So everybody's thinking, all right, we want it fast, cheap, and affordable. And we know that you can never get those three legs of the stools together. We are working as fast as we can to avert a crisis, particularly one in Maryland, where we predict service interruptions as early as next summer. We haven't had major service disruptions on the grid in quite a while. But because of demand, which we call load growth, is occurring at such an exponential pace, and we have charts that show demand was pretty steady or flat throughout COVID, 21, 22, 2023. Starting in 24 and 25 and 26, it was jumping up where we're expecting about a 7% increase by the end of the decade. And you take a look at Maryland, their output is, about 40% of our production right now to keep these lights on is coming from Calvert Cliffs. Another 40% is natural gas. And the remaining 20%, coal, a little bit of solar, a little bit of wind, and kind of wingo make up the balance there. Batteries I have a lot of hope for, but we're the largest power grid in North America, and we have one battery on the system, one in Virginia. Our interconnection queue has been chock full of renewable clean energy projects, about 98% of our last queue, solar, wind, and battery, but none of them are getting built. I shouldn't say none. The vast majority are not getting constructed. And there are reasons why. Top reason is permitting. Today, it's taking double the amount of time than it did 10 years ago to build a project at double the cost, right? So that doesn't help. So permits, number one. Financing, number two. Interest rates are going in the wrong direction. Projects are no longer penciling out when they did 5 years ago. And then supply chain is number three. Our solar panels, industrial scale solar panels, are on a slow boat from China. And when they arrive, there's a new tariff that they did not build in 12 months ago. And so after PJM reviews the projects, greenlights them, they're sitting around, we call them up and say, why aren't you building in Virginia or Maryland or New Jersey? That's usually one of the three top reasons that they give us for not going forward. I hate the term meeting the moment, right? I hear that a lot, but we have 12 months before July 1st, and we put our Public Service Commission across the street on notice recently. We need to build a new transmission line by next summer. Otherwise, we'll see service interruptions. And that day is drawing near.
I feel like we have to now talk about the Piedmont Power Line if we're going to introduce the transmission line, or needing a new transmission line. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that project, or any of you. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just give a high-level background and invite my colleagues. So Piedmont Power Line is a line that we determined we needed for reliability. It's 67 miles long, crosses 3 counties, Baltimore, Carroll, and Frederick. 500 kV, so it's a relatively high voltage line, and that will bring in more supplies from Pennsylvania into Maryland, alleviating congestion in and around Baltimore, which is a constrained zone. Think of it as highways, right? But the electrons on the transmission lines in and around Baltimore are very constrained. Of our 14 states, the Baltimore zone is amongst the most constrained, and I noted the blackout that we had here on August 11th of last year. Fortunately, if anybody experienced that? Got 1, 2? Yeah. It was only 22 minutes long, and we worked closely with our partners at BGE and Exelon to limit the duration. But I remember that morning in the control room at 6 a.m., we knew we'd have a problem. We asked the control room operators, when are the lights going to go off? They said 4 p.m. Happened at 3:52. Working hand in hand with BGE, calling Baltimore City Police, hey, shift change at 2 o'clock. Make sure you have officers at intersections at 4 in case the lights go out. We were off by about 8 minutes. I hope that does not become a more frequent occurrence, but it's something that we do need to prepare for.
So, Lindsey, I'm curious your thoughts on this from the BGE Pepco side, especially just what can, or is there something you can do on the distribution side?
Yeah. I think that was a pretty dark picture that I think we've all been trying to work through in the back end. And as the utilities, we take our direction to some extent from the state in terms of what's the state policy and how can we implement those, and from the Public Service Commission about, what proceedings are they opening, what opportunities do we have to implement things that can provide kind of near-term and medium solutions. So a lot of the conversation that we've heard about is on the transmission level. It can take a long time to effectuate things on the transmission level, years. And so then the opportunity for us on the distribution level is what can we do now? What can we do next summer? What can we do in 3 years that really can make an impact? And so Adam talked about efficiency, and I think that is something that's huge that we've been working on for years. We've had programs in place since 2008 that have helped our customers, you all, go and the next time you're going to make an investment in your home, make it a cleaner device, make it a more efficient device. And those little actions have built up to huge impact over the years. And I think I've got some specific stats somewhere, which I'll get back to. Oh, yes, here we are. So since 2009, we have dispersed almost $1 billion in incentives and bill credits to our customers, which has collectively helped reduce 5.8 million megawatt hours. So that is impact when you think about what can efficiency doing. And that's the first level of defense I think we've talked about here, which is the best kilowatt is the one you don't spend. And then the second thing, you talked about peak demand. That's another area where we have to build our system for that worst moment. And that's what our system is built to. So instead, if we can find ways to curve peak demand, that is where we can have a lot of impact in the near term. It also hopefully will help to lead to less cost that we have to send up to the transmission to pay for capacity and other things. So a couple things that you all might hear about. Who has heard of a virtual power plant? All right, so that's impactful. That's something that we've seen has shown up really well in California, in Puerto Rico and other parts of the country. This idea of there are all these distributed resources in customers' homes. How do we aggregate those resources through the utility and have them work to reduce peak demand, or in a perfect world, push that power onto the grid so we don't have to buy it from someplace else. So virtual power plant, that's a program that we're hoping we can combine with our demand response programs. And these are near-term solutions that can have a pretty immediate impact that we're hoping, we've got a filing with the commission right now that we're hoping will move forward. For Pepco alone, it has about 219 megawatts. So trying to get close to that peak demand, a percentage of that peak demand. So that's one specific example. We talked about storage too. This is another one where if we can put storage on the distribution system in places where we have, and we already know there are challenges, that's another way that we can inject kind of very specific resources where they're needed. So there's lots of near-term tools that we're working on, and my hope is to give you all hope that we've got a pretty dire situation, but we are working really closely with the state to identify what are the solutions the state wants to see move forward, and with our customers to give you all solutions and education about what the heck is on my bill, why is this happening, and what can I do about it?
So this next question is going to be a bit of a team question. So I think we're going to need the power of all three of you here. But the state's legislative response is the Lower Bills and Local Power Act. I think, Adam, you mentioned it's a big bill. So there are a lot of components to it. And it's also the Utility Relief Act. So I'm hoping that amongst the three of you, you can help us understand at least some of the components that are part of this bill. I know that it's, again, a behemoth of a thing, so we probably won't get through everything, but at least talk about some of the elements, specifically the things that probably relate the most to your seats and your views. And whoever wants to go first.
So it is a very large omnibus bill. At one point, it was 200 pages. I think it got pared back. Governor Moore will be signing that bill later on today. A few items that affects, I think, customers, right? Let's talk about the ones that have a direct impact on the utility bill. Number one, the state's flagship energy efficiency program will be suspended in part for several years. If you look at your PEPCO or BGE bill, you could see a charge for Empower, which is the name of the program, anywhere from $12 to $20, maybe more, depending on your usage. That goes to funds program and program administration for these energy efficiency programs. Another one is they're capping effectively how much senior managers and supervisors at utilities could actually earn and charge back to customers. Utilities could pay their executives as much as they want, but at some point it will go onto the shareholder side of the ledger versus the ratepayer side. And there's also a requirement, while some politicians are saying, well, let's pull Maryland out of PJM and start our own grid here in Maryland, the Utility Relief Act actually did the opposite and said that utilities in Maryland must be required to participate in a grid like PJM. And the reason they did that was to, and it wasn't a loophole, but there's a federal policy on the books that provides transmission owners such as First Energy and Exelon with an additional 50 points to their return on equity, basis points, for voluntary membership in a grid. So if the state changes the rules and say, oh, it's not voluntary, you are required to participate in a grid, entities like Exelon automatically lose that 50 basis points. Will that translate into some savings for customers, trickle down? Yes, it will. Does that contravene federal policy? Yes, it does. Estimates from Department of Legislative Services estimates that the bill savings will be somewhere, I believe it was between $12 and $14 a month, $150 a year. So those were the top three of 25 different components, and I'll let my colleagues discuss others, that have the immediate effect of bringing down bill prices. By far and away, the suspension, partial suspension of Empower will have the greatest impact on that bill savings.
So I might say that Empower piece is a little bit differently. I wouldn't necessarily call it a suspension. I would call it, I think the state has been rightfully so pushing the utilities to get more and more. And instead of pushing that goal higher, it's going to hold it constant for the next few years. So I don't want people to think that they're not going to have access to those programs anymore, because those programs are very important to customers. It's just that it's moderated the growth and how quickly the investments for the utilities and those programs. So just wanted to say that same comment, but just slightly different nuance there. I think the other couple of things, and I agree with everything you said in terms, the whole point of the bill was to say, how do we lower customer bills now? What are the immediate things that we can do now? So a couple other, and want to tie another point where you said with that three-legged stool of affordability, reliability, and growth. I think those two pieces kind of come together in this bill, because the other thing that I think came out that I think we're really focused on in partnership with the state and the clean energy industry is they changed how solar and others are going to get incentivized moving forward. So we talked about the importance of the growth of DERs in the state. And so looking forward to partnering with the industry to say, okay, we acknowledge that the federal policies have changed and everything that Jason said about the difficulty of getting, these assets in line. And so how do we continue to grow Maryland's clean energy industry? And so we'll be partnering on policy changes that are going to be happening to help hit. Currently, Maryland has a goal of 3,000 megawatts of solar in the state. They increased that cap to 6,000 megawatts, which is a big number. And so partnering around that. I think the other thing worth noting is Maryland, unlike the district and other parts of the country, doesn't have any limited income rate structures. And so recently there was some work that was done on that, and I think there was, as part of the legislation, continued investment in limited income mechanisms. And then, I don't know if we want to talk about data centers.
Go ahead. Dig in.
Maybe a little bit, and then I'll pass it to Adam. So I think there was a lot, and when we talk about kind of the impact, because Maryland is an importer, the growth of data centers that are happening on PJM is acutely impacting us, right? So it's not that,
Could I add one thing there?
Yeah.
Just for everyone, just in case you don't know, Virginia is known as the data capital of the world. And no matter what we do here in the state of Maryland, Virginia is building more data centers, but it's not the only one. Pennsylvania is also investing in more data centers. And so that's where the other side of that coin is. That's it's making it more expensive to buy energy from those sources.
That's right. So I think this legislation also tried to set some pretty specific parameters around how they want to balance welcoming business into the state, but also making sure that those customers pay their fair share. And I think that is helpful direction for the utilities so that we know how we can kind of follow that path where there's lots of different policies that are being developed across the country about what's the balance with data centers, what level, how big should they be, how much should they pay. And I think the more that we and the state and the legislators provide direction about what they want, I think provides all of us a little bit more clarity about how do we make sure that Maryland is attracting the business of data centers, but doing it in a way where we're cognizant of the impact on our customer bills, which, as we just discussed, the whole point of the bill was to bring our bills down, and so how do we moderate that?
A couple points, and I might have mentioned these earlier. So the bill does include incentives for data centers to be responsible on energy and to provide their own and to pay for upgrades. So that is significant. We're going to, again, going back to smarter, going back to being more localized. The bill includes a $100 million a grant program to help underwrite local generation projects. That's a big deal because, as you said, Jason, the federal government is pulling back a lot of those incentives, but the state is stepping up to fill that breach, and that is a big deal. And also investing in battery storage. So there's new incentives and tax credits, and I see Jen from the Maryland Energy Administration, who I'm sure knows a lot more about this than I do, up here. Do you want to sit here? Okay. Thank you. But I think batteries are a game changer, as Jason said, sort of woefully deployed now. But we also have to remember, folks, fossil fuels have been around for 150 years, something like that. Renewable energy is a very young industry. Jimmy Carter's solar panels were 1978, I think. So it's still a young industry that has been sort of elbowed out by the big fossil interests for a long time, but it is emerging and it is growing. So there are unquestionably challenges, but I think Maryland has stepped up to help accelerate the development of that industry.
So that makes me wonder that with all this conversation, getting back to the core here, what does the future look like? What does the future mix of energy look like? And I have to imagine that each of you are sitting here with a different lens on the problem, a different lens on how do we get there quickly. And I'm curious from each of your seats what a healthy energy mix looks like and what you think Maryland can start to do now to push itself on that road.
I think we have an indicator that was provided just last week where we held another effectively open season for new resources to connect to the grid. And last week it was announced that we had 811 new applications. And you take a look at the applications and they look very different than the applications from just a few years ago where it was almost entirely wind and solar. Here, our number one fuel type was actually natural gas. Number two were batteries. And then a distant fourth was solar. So that gives you a signal of what the market is thinking. Okay, the market has swung back to natural gas after taking a hiatus. And while PJM does have a corporate pillar of decarbonization, reliability is our guiding North Star. So if we need to keep the grid up and we need to call on a gas plant or a coal plant, we will, and we recognize that there are emissions and environmental detriments associated with that. But that gives us sort of a peek into the future, that natural gas, if we could find these turbines, if the supply chain exists, that may be the predominant fuel type going forward.
Yeah, I'm curious, Adam, especially knowing that some of these programs were I guess, are in hiatus. If there's a push to figure out how to make this work no matter what.
I think so. I think that the industry is strong, and I think the market demand has taken a hit, but people still like renewables. 80% of Marylanders support clean energy, and where we got pushback on the offshore wind project on the Eastern Shore, 70% of Eastern Shore residents support renewable energy projects. So I think it's there. But to answer your question, I think continuing to diversify, to continue to support clean energy and smarter. I just keep going back to smarter. With batteries, a plant could run during the night when it's not a peak time, charge and then deploy that energy during a peak time. Solar, certainly challenges with tariffs, but the prices come down substantially in the last 10 years. And being more cost effective on canopy solar, for example, which didn't pencil out 10 years ago and is now beginning to pencil out. How many parking lots can you think of, shopping centers that don't have solar over them? Probably 99% of them. There's opportunity there. The land use challenges are being figured out. Not easy, but the counties have figured out, when we do site utility scale solar projects, what's the right way to do it on lower yielding farmlands, away from sort of scenic view sheds, places where transmission is accessible, and to be a good neighbor. The counties are figuring that out, and the deployment is stepping up. So I think it's there. We have the seeds, still a young industry, and with a young industry, there's also young policies. But I think we're moving through our adolescence pretty quickly, despite all the challenges.
So, Lindsey, I'm very curious because I know this is a lens that that you're passionate about, and not only you're passionate about it, but we've talked in our pre-conversations around things that businesses can do. Adam, you brought up batteries multiple times, solar panels and parking lots, the investment by large businesses in renewables or reducing the carbon emissions. I don't know if you can speak about that, and also I want to know where your coins lay.
Sure. So I think what we've heard, if there's some takeaways from here, is that Maryland is shifting to more a distributed, intermittent, resource dependent. And I think if I were to make a prediction about what I think our future is going to look like, my hope is that Maryland takes more of a role in ownership and a planning perspective about what makes up our mix. And I think for many years we've kind of taken for granted the fact that PJM provided, and so now I think it's an opportunity for us as a state to step up and take ownership a little bit more through broader planning efforts so that we're balancing reliability, affordability, and sustainability at the same time. And so that means like thoughtful investments. I think from my perspective, and then I'll zoom down to the customer, I think that goes in a couple different ways. So one, obviously investing in transmission to relieve constraints, modernizing substations and distribution systems. So increasingly, as the state has set forth a vision to become more electric and less reliant on natural gas, that means the infrastructure underlying that we have today has to meet that demand. And so, we have to do it smartly, as you noted multiple times, but it does mean we're gonna have to make some investments. I think also it creates opportunities for us, and this is where we get to the customer, is how do we leverage the resources that our customers have, like EVs, battery storage, to help us manage our peak demand. A term that you folks probably have heard more about is this idea of flexible load. So how do we see these devices as not just things that people have historically wanted to plug in, but actually how do they become grid resources? And so some of that is education and opportunity with our customers to get them kind of comfortable thinking as a player in this game of energy and security. But it's also a lot on us. The utilities we're old companies. We are trying to evolve. And that means we're investing in things like DERMS so we can actually see all these resources on our system and can direct them to respond. And also what those type of investments in partnership with our customers will allow us to do is make our system reliable, but hopefully also maybe require us to build less. So maybe we can build more smartly because we know we have resources from our customers and we can use those resources instead of having to build a new substation or something like that. So I think that's the vision. That's where everybody wants us to go. It's going to take us a little bit of time and partnership to get there. But I think that's the vision. And the last thing I want to talk about just on the customer side is part of the benefit of our customers feeling like they have a role in all of this is an opportunity from an affordability perspective. So for example, you want to go buy an electric vehicle, right? You're going to buy it for your own means. But what if the utility could pay you $20 a month, $100 a month for access for when you were to charge your vehicle and use that to help shape and shift our demand on the system? What if you went and got a battery? Same reason, you're going to buy that battery anyway. But what if we give you $2,000 a year to, export onto the grid when we need it? That's how we can get smarter. But those things require costs now, and hopefully will have long-term benefits. So I think it's the balancing of those needs through partnership with all the stakeholders is how we're going to get there.
I think there's a thing there that is important to make sure that everyone understands, and that's peak demand. If you can think of this, the grid kind of like a stock market. There are periods where it's at its peak, and there are periods where the load is a lot less. For example, when you're asleep, not as much energy use. It's cheaper to manufacture products in the middle of the night than it is to do it during the day, during peak periods, right? So some of the programs that I'm aware of, at least from BGE, is if you have an EV and you charge your EV overnight, you save substantially as opposed to charging it during the day. I don't know if you can elaborate on some of those programs and a little bit more about how this works, these valleys.
Sure. So yes, and actually we just got approval in January from the commission to run our 5 years of new programs, one of which is called our Smart Charge Management Program. So it's that same exact idea. If you have an electric vehicle, you come home at night, you plug your charger in, and you say, hey, I need this car ready by 8 a.m. And then sometime between 6 p.m., say when you plug it in, and 8 a.m. when you need to leave, you give us the ability to recharge your car anytime in that time period. And so then we have access to say, okay, maybe 10 p.m. we shouldn't start it. Maybe we should run it between like 1 and 4 a.m. And that allows us to kind of lower those peaks as people are charging their cars. But that idea could apply across any time of the day. And that's the whole point. And that's the ability of, as the utility, we're making investments to be able to understand the different devices and how they work and how we can call on them. But then it requires you as customers to be willing to allow us to do that. And so that's that partnership that I think is going to be needed to get us out of that. So we've got an EV program like that. We've got time of use rates, same idea. Instead of turning your washer and dryer on during our peak times during the day, say between 4 and 7, we'll pay you through your rate to do it at a different time. So there are many different types of programs that we're looking at like that, demand response. And this is where, our job as the utility is to reach you all and help you understand what opportunities there are. But then from the customer's perspective, the more that you all can ask questions and try to understand what's out there and align those with what you're comfortable doing, I think that's what we ask of you all.
And batteries work the exact same way that EVs work. So the batteries charge in the middle of the night, and that means that you can then use them at peak periods. And then one of the things that we've seen in California is that there's legislation, some that has already passed, that requires new homes to have batteries or solar power. And I'm curious, Adam, if you have thoughts on things like this, does that make sense for Maryland to push for legislation to maybe have some requirements that push us a little bit further, and, make customers, carry some of this burden? Well, I guess they're carrying the burden already, but you know what I mean.
Well, we're all in it together, and we all have to be part of the solution. I'll just share a personal anecdote. So I bought a starter home in 2003, dating myself, then moved to a bigger house in 2015. In both times, I weatherized the house. They were older houses. The first one was built in 1945, and the second one was built in 1905. So older homes. In both cases, after I weatherized them, and thanks to our partners in the utilities and others, it's heavily underwritten, and I paid out of pocket around between $2,000 and $3,000 for weatherizing my home. My energy bill went down on the first house 55%. 55%, more than half. The second house, the older house, the 1905, it went down 45%. Paid for itself within 2.5 years. So that's just good economics. That's just good checkbook management. That's just good smart stuff to do at home. So that's what we find. Another professional anecdote, not to spend too much time with the microphone. In Montgomery County, I was the director of the Department of Environmental Protection there, and we launched the first BEPS bill. And this required the large buildings greater than 30,000 square feet to institute energy efficiency measures. And even among them, some of the ones that protested the most saw outrageous savings and payback within 5 years by upgrading their systems. So I do think it's smart building code. And it's not just for the consumer, but it's for all of us, because we're paying for other people's inefficiency. So I think it is responsible. I think it's a way that we have to live together in this day and age with the challenges that we have.